everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I wish my boss told me that. And this will be our final episode in our season on networking. And we have an exciting episode ahead of us because we have a new guest, interesting guest, not a person from AB-InBev, but somebody from the India ecosystem. Very proud that we have today on our podcast Hari T.N. Hari does not need an introduction here in India, but for our international listeners, Hari has been at the head of HR of Big Basket, one of the most successful startups in India, has been an author of several books already. He's a strategic advisor now to startups, an angel investor, and also a strategic advisor in Fundamentum Partnership. Had a very interesting, diverse career with different stages that we're going to go through. And I'm pretty sure he will have a lot of amazing learnings to share with us. So great to have you here today. Hari, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Serge, for having me on your show.
So first of all, can you maybe try to summarize, the highlights of your career? Because your career already spans many years, and I think you took different types of routes.
So, Serge, my career can broadly be broken up into three or four buckets. The first bucket is when I started my career through a campus placement at IIM Calcutta with Tata Steel. So, I worked largely as a mechanical engineer for about 11 years. And after 11 years, I moved to human capital or human resources. And that move was more by accident than by design. In large companies, it's common for individuals to rotate across functions so that they get a better understanding of how companies and organizations run more holistically. And at that point of time, Tata Steel was going through a bit of an existential crisis because post-liberalization, CIS countries were dumping steel at prices that were below our costs. And a very old company had to transform, restructure, change the culture of the organization. So we had to do a lot of things to be able to even survive and compete in a completely different environment. And we got McKinsey to help us with this a little bit. And I was part of the core team that worked on this project. And a large part of this project was really about human capital. And that's when I realized that, human capital can be a very, very strategic function, especially for organizations that are rapidly transforming. And startups are always transforming. They're always making pivots. They're continuously changing. And therefore, human capital becomes very strategic for, startups. And at some point of time, I did move out of Tata Steel because I just felt it was a bit too large for my comfort. I was a bit of a rule breaker. And I felt, I wanted to work in a more agile, fast-paced environment. And that's how I joined, a company called Daksh, which was a BPO startup at that point of time. And that happened sometime, I think about 20 years back, close to 20 years back. And I think for me, the last 20 years have been with a string of high growth startups. So the last 20 years, I can break it up into two parts. Part one is the first 14 odd years and the next 6 years. First 14 odd years, I worked, focusing on the company that I was a part of, helping the company scale without the wheels coming off, looking inside, participating in different, activities, initiatives, doing all the right things to help the company scale. And the last 6 years was with Big Basket. And last 6 years, I just felt, what, it made a lot of sense for me to engage with the ecosystem at large, the startup ecosystem. Because I realized that, I had learned so much that these young entrepreneurs that I was seeing in the ecosystem need not make the same mistakes that I had made. And therefore, if I could share some lessons with them, they would stand to gain a lot. And that's how I began engaging with them in multiple ways. I began writing extensively, started with LinkedIn. And what I wrote, I think, connected well with entrepreneurs because it was very practical stuff, nothing academic at all. It was pretty unacademic the way I wrote, very, very practical, very down to earth. And that inspired me, actually, the reception I got on LinkedIn inspired me to write books actually. And in the last 6 years, probably I would have written 6 books, one book a year on an average, on very different topics, but mostly about how to build and scale companies. So that has been an exciting phase the last 6 years, and I've engaged with the ecosystem in multiple capacities, worked with early stage accelerators, early stage VC funds, late stage VC funds, have been writing extensively, and also being a part of Big Basket. So I think this is the third phase of my career, and in
Yeah.
some ways I think it's the most fulfilling as well.
So you had a kind of a corporate start to your career, starting in a big international company, then moving to the startup environment, and now
Correct.
becoming more a player of the ecosystem.
Yes.
Is that something that you consciously thought about when you started your career, that you want to have different types of experiences, or is it something that gradually evolved over the years?
I think it gradually evolved. My own sense is that, it's not very easy to think right up front when you're starting your career, what you really want to do and how you want to spend the next 20, 30 years. I think it's a process of evolution as you learn along the way. New opportunities open up. I think if you keep your eyes and ears open, if you don't suppress your interests, if you continue to learn
Mm.
regularly every day, then I think, you will discover very interesting opportunities. And if you begin to take some risks, then I think things would automatically begin to unfold. So my own sense is that it's very difficult to plan right at the beginning
Yeah.
of your career what all you want to do. They unfold. You just have to keep your eyes, ears, and mind open to new opportunities and should be willing to take those risks.
Yeah, I think it's something that I see. I'm not sure about your opinion, but something that I see a lot of people nowadays kind of struggle with when they start their career, because they're looking and trying to plan ahead and trying to make sure that the next job that they take leads them somewhere, down the line. Whereas my experience as well is that in my career, I didn't really plan ahead for a very long time. I basically took the next opportunity, learned something new,
Mhm.
and it looks like with you, it also evolved more organically rather than
Yes,
consciously planned. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So this episode is about networking, because I believe we can learn a lot from you in the area of networking, which I believe is one of the most critical, yeah, let's call it skills or characteristics that a leader should have, or a person who wants to make an amazing career should have. Be able to network with people, to connect with people, to advance their learning. Do you think that that networking is something that extroverts are great in? Do you see a connection between, being extrovert or introvert and being really good at networking for your career?
Not necessarily, Serge. I think both introverts as well as extroverts can be good at networking. I think for some strange reason, we try and judge people and put them into some binaries, which is extrovert, introvert. And these are all binaries. Actually, the whole world is a state of continuum, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. Actually, very early on in my career, I might have probably agreed with you. In fact, very early on, I used to hear from my bosses and senior folks that I had a great regard for, saying that networking is an important component for developing your career. And for me, I assume that networking is about being able to get along with people very superficially in cocktail parties. And I wasn't good at that. And since I assumed that that's what networking is all about, I was a little, depressed that I'm not destined probably to be successful in my career because I can't network. But then I chose to ignore that and chose to stay focused on what I really do well. And all of us have strengths. I have my own strengths too. So I just stayed very, very focused on what I really do well, built on them, built complementary capabilities, and gradually, I discovered that even as an introvert, you can network. Just think about it. What is networking? Networking is about being able to develop mutually beneficial relationships. That is what networking is all about. And I think anybody can develop those mutually beneficial relationships. And my own sense is that, you have to start by thinking about how you can help other people based on what you're really good at, because that's the way you can spread and make a larger impact, not just focusing on where you are, but helping a lot of other people based on what you're really good at. And once people begin to receive help, people begin to know what you stand for, I think they will respect you, you will develop a reputation, and they in turn will begin to help you. So if a stranger makes a call to you, most people are rude. They may not even respond, especially if they realize that the other person is going to ask for some help or going to ask for some connection or going to ask you for a job or an introduction. But if you are open to helping that person, because it causes you no harm, it just requires you to take some time out. If you do that consistently, I think people will then begin to help you. That's how you build your network. So I think everybody can build networks. You need to figure out what kind of network you need to build based on who you are as an individual. So I don't believe that, only extroverts can build networks. I think this is a myth. I think introverts can build networks, build great relationships, and extroverts can also have very deep conversations, because the belief is that extroverts can't have deep conversations. So I think the myths are all
They're
there to be
everywhere.
broken.
Yeah. So how do you see networking then? So networking is not, as you said, no, I think a lot of us think that if I go to a conference, if I go to an event, if I go to a corporate event in our company or with other companies, that networking is making contact with as many people as possible, no, getting their business cards, getting their WhatsApp
Yes.
numbers, because then I have a very broad network. Is that what networking is, or do you see, because you talked about relationships, is it for you much more about having very tight relationships, maybe with much fewer people?
So for me, networking is not about collecting business cards at all and meeting hundreds of people in a conference. I think if you're going attend a conference, you must be clear why you're going there. If you're going there because the topic is of interest and there are some experts who are going to provide you some insights, that's great. In the process, I'm sure you will collect some business cards, you will meet some interesting people. And I think the focus should not be on collecting hundreds of business cards, but the focus should be on identifying those 5 or 6 people with whom you can have a mutually beneficial relationship. It always happens. There will always be 5 or 6 who stand out, with whom somewhere intuition tells you that you can develop these long-term relationships. So I think it's important to figure out who are those people with whom you would like to establish long-term relationships. And in the process, when you collect cards, there will be some people who collect your card as well. And if they reach out to you for some help, do help them out. If it's possible, do help them out. And I think that's where you start building relationships. So I think while you collect cards, that's not the objective. I think objective is give and take. Spend some time, go out of your way to help people, even if there's nothing for you in return immediately. I think that is networking to me.
So you look at networking more from helping
Correct.
other people. That, of
Yes,
course, to a certain extent, will be helpful to you as well in your
absolutely.
career or your life, right? So not
Correct.
just
Correct.
going about and helping 100 people, but being a little bit more targeted, identifying
Correct.
which kind of relationships you would
Yes.
like to build, and
Correct.
then starting off more selflessly
Yeah.
rather than, let's say, approaching them for help straight away.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if we look at your career, because again, if we look at your career, you had different types of stages. I imagine that building a network is slightly different when you work within a corporate company versus when you work within a startup. How did you start early on in your career? Because you mentioned that you were a bit uncomfortable in the beginning. You thought you would not be able to network. What was the moment when you realized, when you worked for Tata Steel, that you said, okay, I can build my network, and this is how I can build my network in a big corporate?
So I think in a big corporate, it's important even in a big corporate to build a network, because work gets done based on relationships. And a large company is spread out. There are several functions and everyone, has priorities. So if you have your network, if you have built relationships, then your work tends to get prioritized a little bit. So I think even a large company, it's important to build those relationships. I think I realized that pretty quickly. What I also realized that was I am not going to do well in a cocktail party where I have to, interact with people I may not know well and carry on superficial, you know, conversation. I knew that I won't do well there. But I also realized that, even in a large company, it's important to have a good relationship with, let's say, the head of procurement, the head of finance, because let's say if I was working in, project management, your vendor invoices need to be processed quickly for them to provide you good services, continue to provide. And finance receives hundreds of, invoices. You should be able to pick up the phone and say, this is, this vendor invoice is pending. Can you please pay it? So I think these relationships in a large company act as a very powerful lubricant to get work done. If you work in IBM, which is scattered across the globe, and you don't know those people who are with whom you need to interact and get your work done. Having those relationships right, networking well, helping them when they are in need, and you in return getting help when you are needed, I think is very, very important in a large company.
Yeah, yeah, fully agree. I think this is one of the big benefits of networking. Well, what about the startup environment? How, do you see a difference in networking or the importance of networking when you worked in the startup environment, or would
So
you
yeah,
approach it in the same way?
so I think you can approach it in the same way, but startups tend to be much smaller. And my own sense is that,
Mm,
networking within a startup is not as critical as networking in a large company. Large company, getting work done is very dependent on your network. But in a startup, which is much smaller, I think generally people, accept that speed and agility is important. You can escalate very quickly, and networking is not as critical. But I think in the startup ecosystem in which I'm playing of late, I think there, networking always is helpful. So for example, if I stay networked, if I'm part of Fundamentum, let's say, which is a VC firm, being networked with entrepreneurs helps me, identify those
mm,
entrepreneurs who have great ideas and who are looking for money. If I am networked with them, they will look at me and they will look at Fundamentum first rather than looking at some other VC fund. So I think, being networked and having those relationships ensures that they look at you first. When they have
mm.
multiple, things, multiple opportunities, they give you attention and they will respond to you. So I think you get the you can they will you will be the first port of call for them probably. So I think networking generally helps if you're part of an ecosystem as such.
Yeah, yeah,
Within a single startup, it may not be as critical, maybe.
yeah. I think it will give you new ideas, no? Access to people who have different
Yes,
types of ideas. You can test your ideas with new types of insights that you will get, rather
yes,
than if
yes,
you're more focused on your bubble where you are
yes,
working at that moment. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And do you think it's because I would think it is a bit more complicated or difficult to start building that network in this startup environment? Because in a corporate, I think it's a little bit easier. You know, you can walk up to the head of finance, as you
Yes,
mentioned, introduce yourself, you work for the same company. There's an easy way for you to connect. And then, okay, you can take it from there. Whereas if you're trying to build relationships outside of your company, which you mentioned in a startup is
yes.
mainly the case, yeah, how do you start? Because yeah, it's kind of a cold call that you can do to somebody, and then it depends whether that person, you know, finds it interesting to build a
Yeah,
network with you. So there's less of a
correct,
connection than when you
correct,
work in
correct.
the same company.
Correct, correct. So I think there are two ways in which you can do this. One is today social media is ubiquitous. So therefore, I think you should build your brand on social media. What you
Mm,
stand for, what are some of your capabilities, why someone should value you, what is it that's so great in you that somebody should want to network with you. So I think your reputation, your brand, what you stand for, your core capabilities, the positions that you take on various issues should be known to everyone. If people begin to know you, then I think they will want to network with you. So, for example, I have been speaking about multiple topics. I wrote an article in the Mint on mental health and the fact that, why a 4-day week is not going to solve the problem of mental health.
mm,
Suddenly, there were a bunch of people who were experts in mental health who were reaching out to me, to stay connected, ask me to speak about mental health in some forums. So I think, social media is allowing people to network. And there,
mm.
I think you should build your brand, you should build your thought leadership. What is it that you're good at? What positions you take on various controversial, complex issues? I think that's one point, number one. I think number two continues to be helping other people, because invariably somebody will reach out to you and say, I work at Big Basket. We are trying to list a product on Big Basket. Can you help me? Somebody reaches out to me, right? There are two ways in which I could deal with this. I can say, I can ignore that or say that I'm extremely busy, or I can go a little out of the way, take that email,
Mm.
introduce that company or that start company which wants to list a product on Big Basket to the buying and merchandise team with a recommendation that this is a startup which is struggling to reach out to customers. Can we help? And this is the contact. So then if you do that, then I think that person whom you have helped will go and tell 10 other people that T.N. Hari, is a very helpful person. If you wish to reach out, please reach out to him. So I think that's how the word spreads. So helping people is always a given. I think that's the most powerful way to network in any context. And in a context which is you have to go out of your company, as I said, the first one was building your reputation, what you stand for on social
Yeah,
media.
yeah. But isn't there a risk for yourself to get completely overloaded with people requesting for help at a certain point? If you're very helpful to someone, the word spreads, and then you get overloaded with requests. How do you deal with that? I'm sure you must have been contacted by hundreds of people. How do
Yes.
you filter? Do on social media? Do you reply to everybody? How do you manage that?
Yes, that's a very good question. So my own belief is that, this is again a myth that it takes a lot of time to be able to respond to requests or help people. It is not true at all. So I received several requests. For me, it's just an email introduction. It just takes 15 seconds, 1 minute to make that email introduction. Would you
Mm,
not want to spend that 1 minute introducing somebody if it can make a difference to the life of that individual? Is 1 minute such a difficult? Won't you find that 1 minute? Maybe you will find 10 other people. Those 1 minute is all 10 minutes. And there will
yeah,
be some people who will, try to misuse this. But there you can be a very quickly, very firm and say, this is not something I can help you. Or, sometimes they ask you for a job. So many people reach out to me for jobs. I know I can't help
yeah,
them with jobs. So I tell them
yeah.
very upfront. So many people approach me for angel investing. I tell them very standard response, which is that I'm not a particularly active angel investor. But if
Mm,
something interests me, I will respond saying that, can you send me your deck? So I'm not a particularly active angel investor. So I will pass. Best of luck, nevertheless. It's just a sentence.
mm,
So wouldn't
yeah,
you want to put that sentence to build this network? So I think
yeah.
that's an investment in time you can always make. I can tell you honestly, it's a very low investment in time. It's not high at all.
Yeah. It might look overwhelming if you see all your requests in
Yeah,
your LinkedIn or any other profile, but indeed, if you sit down, it's probably only a couple of minutes. I think you need to
yeah,
be able to be firm. That's
correct.
correct, right? And
Yeah,
choose which requests make sense to you as much for the person contacting
correct,
you, and which ones do you know are not going to lead anywhere, and then be very clear on what you can do and you can't
correct.
do. And that's probably also very tough for a lot of people to reply saying, no, I'm sorry, I cannot help you
Yeah,
with
correct,
a job
correct.
offer or with an angel investing, because
And
yeah,
so many times, even when I've said no, people have been very happy. They've said thank you for at least responding. Many
yeah,
people don't even respond. That's very rude, I think. If you respond and say, I can't do it, I'm sorry, there's nothing like this opening. I think people feel very happy. They've said, thank you so much for responding. I appreciate that.
yeah. So you see, it's not normal. It's not, let's say, the normal response today that people are connecting
Yeah,
very openly on those platforms.
yeah.
Correct. Do you maybe have an example of how networking has really impacted your career? A very concrete example. We talked about some benefits of networking earlier on, that you can connect with people with new types of insights. You can be more efficient in your career because you can pick up the phone to somebody that you know and get things done. Do you have any examples throughout your career that where networking has really bolstered the next step in your career?
Yes, absolutely. There are hundreds of examples. All the books that I have written, I have co-authored with somebody, and each
Mm,
of them is a person with repute. I found all of them by networking. Every single book has been co-authored with somebody who is a domain expert, as passionate as I am about that book. And finding the co-author would have not have been possible if I were
mm,
not a networker. That's how I've discovered, a range of topics. There's a book which is just going to get published, and that book is about diversity beyond tokenism. And I found one of the persons who understands this subject extremely well, is bold in her positions that she takes. And she reached out to me. And she reached out to me because she knew what I stood for, which is I speak my mind. I
mm.
don't, I call a spade on whatever the topic. I don't just say the politically correct things. And she was exactly the same. So she reached out to me. So that book happened because of this. And so many books, all my books happened because of being able to network. Now, for example, an advisor at Arkham Ventures, work with Fundamental. All of them happened because they realized that, I can bring value. And based on, my connections, based on what I have
mm,
been writing extensively, they knew that, yes, he's the right person, to benefit, to work with. And for example, at some point of time, I will be done and dusted with Big Basket. How do I spend the next 10 years of my life? I have
mm,
to have a fulfilling something, do something very interesting and fulfilling. And that interesting and fulfilling stuff can be done only if I have, build those relationships. So for example, as I told, I think I mentioned to someone that I'm looking at setting up a school for entrepreneurship along with a bunch of other people. I got three other co-founders to help me with, or all four of us have actually come together because of this network. Because of my
mm,
networking, I found those, or we found one another. And now setting up a school like this will need you to find faculty across the world. And how do I find faculty across the world? Because I have networked. I want
mm,
some authors who've written some wonderful books on startups to come and teach. I myself have been an author, so other authors I tend to know, and they will happily come and help me. So I think networking has helped me
mm.
immensely, has been very, very, like, for example, I'm doing this podcast with you. I'm sure maybe 100 people, 50 people will listen to this podcast. They will remember it in some way. And somewhere, it is bound to pay me back, because somewhere else, when I need help, they will say, yes, I think I listened to your podcast. I know you. And
Yeah,
that's how it helps.
yeah. So yeah, I think the red line through this conversation is that for you, networking is much more about helping people, helping the right people with the unique experience that you have, and then one day that network that you've
Yes.
built
Yeah.
somehow will help you
Correct.
back in your
Back.
career, basically.
Correct.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. I think you mentioned something interesting, the School of Entrepreneurship. So if you go back to your career, corporate, startup, then more ecosystem, what is next in your career? Do you see a fourth stage there
Yes.
already gradually building?
Yes, I'm looking at it's a dream search, setting up a school for entrepreneurship, because startups have been my first love always, and the last 20 years. And I've discovered that a lot of entrepreneurs, they are bold, have wonderful, amazing ideas, and can potentially go on to become large companies, build large companies. But they need some help along the way when it comes to scaling. I think what young entrepreneurs are really good at is understanding consumer product technology,
Mm,
but then scaling that business is something that they don't really understand. So I think at some stage, when they reach a revenue of maybe 20 million, 50 million, at 100 million, I think that's where they begin to falter. That's where they begin to trip up. So my passion is about how do you help all those entrepreneurs to build amazing large companies. So from that perspective, we've identified four of us. Actually, we have found each other with a similar passion,
mhm.
and we are thinking of at some point of time in the reasonably near future, to set up a school for entrepreneurship that will help entrepreneurs scale their businesses.
Oh, wow, that sounds super interesting, super exciting. Something that builds indeed on your experience that you've already had,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the massive network that you must have by
Yes.
now. No?
Yeah.
Very nice, very interesting learnings, Hari. But you know that the title of this podcast is also "I wish my boss told me that." Right. So our last question to our guests is always, "What is that one thing that you learned somewhere down the line in your career that you wish your boss in the early days would have told you?"
Yeah, so I think it's very difficult to answer this question, but let me try nevertheless. I think everything in life is learned the hard way. I think if somebody comes and gives you an answer and tells you do that this way, you're going to likely avoid a problem. I think most of us would not believe it. We would like to make that mistake. But I think some smart people do learn a few lessons, I feel. But largely, you need to make your own mistakes. So
Mm,
if there's one thing that my boss could have told me, maybe that would have been that, play to your strengths, and stick to what you're really good at, and you are bound to succeed.
yeah. So just a follow-up question on that. So what's your view on kind of performance evaluations. No, a question that I get in a lot of cases is, should I focus
Yeah.
on the feedback that I'm getting on the things that I'm not good at, or should I focus on the strengths that I have, or a combination of the two?
This is a very good question. So let me answer. I think I've also been asked this question, and my position on this is very clear. So I think, eventually you should do things that play to your strengths, because that's what will make life enjoyable and that's what will make you successful. Having said that, I think you also need to develop something which is complementary, even though it may not be
Mm,
your strength. Because if you don't develop the complementary stuff, then people won't respect you. Say, for example, you're a very strategic thinker. You can think in an uncluttered way. But let's say you're poor in execution, then people won't respect you because they would say, you only speak, you don't get things done, you can't get things done. So while you may not be amazing at execution, you think you need to get reasonably good so that people respect you for your strategic thinking. So I think all of these things, so you need to develop some complementary skills. You may
mm.
never be really good at that, but I think if you're reasonably good at that, people will respect you for what you're really good at.
Yeah, that's a great example. Very comparable as well to sports. I always like to compare to sports. If you have
Mhm.
in tennis an amazing forehand, but a very lousy
Yeah.
backhand, your opposition will always target your backhand, and you will only be able to grow as a tennis player if you
Yes.
fix your
Correct.
backhand. You'll never be the person with the best backhand, but at least you'll be able to counter
Yeah. Best
the
backhand.
attack on
Correct.
that backhand, and then focus on your strength, which is the forehand, and try to win the game. Okay, thanks a lot, Hari, for joining our episode here. It was a great episode, a lot of learning. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Serge. I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of your show.
And by the way, I wish you all the best with the next phase in your career, building the school of entrepreneurship, and also really looking forward to your new book on D&I, which I'm sure will have a lot of interesting and maybe even provocative ideas on that D&I topic. Our next season is going to be about diversity and inclusion. So to all our listeners, tune in to that next season. Will be released very soon with interesting ideas about how to approach diversity and inclusion. So thanks all for watching and listening. Please like our show, share our show, and see you in the next season. Cheers.